Hello and welcome to Newsclick. Today we have with us Professor Vijay Prashad of Trinity College, Connecticut. Vijay, good to have you with us.
Thank you so much.
We have been looking at this Wikileaks issue, which of course has really hit the pages of all the newspapers. The fact that it's a completely new kind of journalism in some sense. We have had a whole bunch of documents coming out, and you've also had this collaboration between new media, as it is known, and the old media, New York Times, Der Spiegel and Guardian. Do you think this is something new in journalism that has come about?
I think it's remarkable. I mean, you have here a combination of people who were involved in a sort of anarchist politics on the one side with a healthy suspicion of state secrecy. So you have a certain temperament coming to the fore. You have a technology that has given them the ability to enact their views about secrecy and information, and that technology of course is the ability to have multiple servers and to not get shut down by a canny state. And the third thing is that you have the advantage of people like the pirate group from Sweden, where they've been able to construct a community of hackers and computer engineers who are committed to the first temperament, the sort of open society, open information temperament, and they've created something phenomenal. I mean, consider Wikileaks is only about 5 years old, and it has already provided some of the biggest stories, not only stories to do with the Iraq war, the Apache helicopter fire ships killing civilians, not only 92,000 documents on the Afghan war, the so-called Afghan War Diary, but also financial materials from Iceland. I mean, the Icelandic government fell as a consequence of Wikileaks exposing malfeasance in the Icelandic financial and political system. So there is a certain commitment to open information which one has not seen from conventional media.
But the issue is that what is its impact? For instance, Pentagon Papers, which it has been compared to, was really processed information which had access to the highest levels of the US government, and then there was the information of what it contained. All of that is really what came out. It was, in some sense, Wikileaks, what it has done, Afghan War Logs, is really unprocessed information, but also at the level of the war, people involved in the war itself. Of course, all Americans, so it's really one side of it. Do you think it has the possibility of impacting the developments the way Pentagon Papers, for instance, did?
It's, as you say, quite different from the Pentagon Papers. I mean, the Pentagon Papers were a history of the war, which were, commissioned by the Department of Defense, commissioned by Robert McNamara's team. They put together, looking at primary materials, they put together an argument. It had a lot of primary material in it, but it wasn't unprocessed documents. This is different. This, I think, we can look at in 3 levels. The first level, it's given us the raw material window into what the planners were seeing when they were making their second order judgments, when they were then talking about the war, based on this raw material. So now we can go back and judge what they were telling the public based on what the raw data has told them.
So there's a disjunct between the two. Or
there is, I think, going to be a disjuncture, although it requires some analysis. So that's the first thing. The second thing that is quite clear from the documents already is that the American troops and the NATO troops were already embroiled in local controversies. It seems very clear that so much of the information they were getting was one side who had a beef against another, bringing in the Americans. And this was clear, by the way, when troops were returning from Afghanistan. There were 2 autobiographies or memoirs of the war written by 2 grunts. Both of them recounted stories of where they got a call in saying that there's Taliban in the next valley. They were ready to go and bring in airstrike, and then a member of parliament showed up and said, just wait a minute, this is a local conflict, please don't bomb my people on the other side of the valley. So that's the second thing that's completely clear, is that basically the American troops were taking their orders from below. There's no strategy coming out of these papers. The third thing that I think is very distressing in a way is the level of civilian casualties. This has not been brought out either in the analysis of the documents or of course between 2004 and 2009. There are so many instances where it appears as if the rules of engagement were not followed. And I think that this is going to be the aspect as people analyze these 92,000 documents in more detail. The level of civilian casualties and violations of the US military's code of conduct is going to be, I think, quite shocking.
Vijay, the other point that comes out, it seems to have faded out from mainstream reports very quickly. Do you think that this will really have any serious impact on the Afghanistan war?
Well, let's take it in a few steps. Initially, of course, 2 days after the Wikileaks dump and the reporting, very canny use of the New York Times, Der Spiegel and The Guardian, 2 days after that, the United States Congress voted $37 billion appropriation to continue the Afghan war. Now, it should be said that a year ago, there were only a handful of Democratic congressmen and congresswomen that voted against the appropriation. This year, their numbers have risen, but not sufficiently enough to make any kind of block to war funding. So, on the surface, of course, no difference. War funding has continued. President Obama, very cannily, in that typical way of his, brushed it off. He said, well, there's nothing new here. Of course, there's nothing new here. This is the stuff that the government already knows. It's new to the public, it's new to us, not new to them. So, at the face of it, there has been no change. This has not made a jot of difference. But there is a major problem that they're going to have to deal with. And that problem, the name of that problem is Pakistan. Because however much Hamid Gul, Lieutenant General of the Pakistani Armed Forces and former head of the ISI, however much he has been saying that this is all nonsense. My name appears 75 times in these documents. It's all nonsense. Everybody now seems to suggest that he had some role to play. He was talking to somebody in Waziristan, whether it's in his own capacity or he was following orders from somewhere. That's not really the case. But the fact that Hamid Gul's name appears several times, the fact that Pakistani ISI, so-called S division, is implicated in these documents, which doesn't mean that it's implicated in the real world. It's implicated by informers. Because of that, you've had the British Prime Minister point fingers at Islamabad. You've had the Obama administration once more bring up the question of Pakistan. So Pakistan is on the table. So they are in convulsion over the place of Pakistan in their war strategy.
Coming back to the last issue, the issue of what the Defense Department has talked about, the safety of the informers, that this really endangers, this kind of public dump of documents endangers the informers who are on the ground. And this is really one of the arguments Adrian Lamo, who was involved with Bradley Manning on this information coming out and so on, who actually turned Bradley Manning into the FBI and so on, has based himself on. So how do you take this issue of safety of information, the people, the personnel safety issue in this?
Well, let's just first start with the question of names named. I mean, one has known, and there have been secondary reports suggesting corruption, for instance, in the Afghan government. It's always come in general. In the Wikileaks report, in the document dump, they have named names. So there are actual names of people who have taken cash, turned it over. They've named names of people involved in the drug trade. So there are lots of names in these documents. But of course, there are also the informers, and they are going to be vulnerable. Now, Wikileaks has held back 12 to 15,000 more documents, which they are trying to scrub and analyze to make sure the most obvious documents, which name informers' names, are not available in the public domain. What can one say? This is the risk of being an informer.
Sanjay said that we protect the sources. So if the American government, which has been involved with so many civilian killings, really have that concern about their informers, why don't they give them protection?
Exactly. Why don't they give them protection? And it's of course well established that every time there's been a leak, the government has gone after the situation of the leak and not the issue itself. When the Apache helicopter video was released, the first thing the government said is that this violates state secrets.
Well, that's why Bradley Manning has been arrested. That
Exactly.
was really following this.
Precisely. I mean, even though there is a substantive issue here, the issue is not being addressed. They simply want to, and of course they don't want to address the issue, because what has been demonstrated is the Afghan war continues to be a fiasco, and the real issue here is what kind of war making are they doing? What kind of state making are they going to do? I mean, how much longer are the Afghan people going to have to put up with this? That's the issue that the war logs have put forward again. But that's not what the government at this time is prepared to deal with.
Thanks, Vijay. This has been good. Hope to have you with us more on these issues.
Thank you.